Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's presentation of the Kirk webinar series, entitled Right-Sizing Your Collection Infrastructure, Successful Efforts to Gain Program Efficiency by Removing Containers. My name is Eric Halverson. I'm the Program Coordinator for the College and University Recycling Coalition, and I'll be your moderator today. For those of you not familiar with Kirk, the College and University Recycling Coalition is a member-based organization that works to grow collegiate recycling and waste reduction efforts by fostering technical information exchange and network opportunities between the staff and student leaders implementing programs. Today's program is part of our free Kirk webinar series, which is designed to highlight innovative campus programs and provide trends and perspectives on a broad range of operational, educational, and other topics related to collegiate recycling and sustainable materials management. Today's program is the 5th webinar in our 2019 series. I would like to thank our partner, AASHE, the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education, for the logistical and promotional support for the webinar series. I also want to recognize today's housekeeping notes to go over. So if you have any problems with your audio or video during the webinar, you can reach a live technician by calling GoToWebinar's customer support line at 800-263-6317. And to avoid background noise, we've placed all but our panelists' lines on mute. And we encourage you to submit questions at any time, however, by using the dashboard on the right side of your screen. Simply click the plus symbol where it says questions to type us a note, and we will read as many of these as possible out loud at the end of the presentations. Copies of today's presentation slides will be available to download and a recording available to stream within the next day or so from the Kirk website, which is www.curc3r.org. You will also receive a follow-up email with a link to this resource. Today's webinar, we'll hear 3 presentations focused on experiences and knowledge of assessing and implementing the optimal strategies for and the sizes of campus waste collection infrastructure. We'll start with a presentation from Bud Fraser, Senior Planning and Sustainability Engineer with the University of British Columbia. Next, we'll hear from Tom Lembo with Clean River Recycling Solutions. And finally, we'll hear Darci Pellom, Landscape Architect Project Manager at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. Bud Fraser is the Senior Planning and Sustainability Engineer within the Campus and Community Planning Department at the University of British Columbia. Bud works with business units and stakeholders across the university to develop and implement sustainability and resource conservation plans. With a background in bioresource engineering, he has been involved in the planning field for about 13 years. And since 2014, implementation of UBC's Zero Waste Action Plan is one of Bud's priorities. So welcome, Bud.
Thanks very much. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Hi, everyone, and it's great to be joining you from the West Coast, British Columbia. I've got a short presentation today that will outline how we transitioned from single garbage cans to multi-stream recycling in both indoor and outdoor spaces, how we dealt with capacity and other issues of concern, and some of the feedback from users and stakeholders. Our Vancouver campus is quite substantial in size, We're essentially a town with hundreds of buildings and a daytime population of over 60,000 people. Where this story starts is with our zero waste action plan. In 2014, that's when we really started to ramp up the implementation of that plan, with an initiative to replace single garbage cans across the campus with multi-stream recycling stations. To test our new stations and our updated collection model, we started with a pilot in one of our main libraries. You can see in the photo there, Walter Kerner Library. Interesting trivia point here is if anyone has ever seen the fictional TV series called Man in the High Castle, Vancouver's a stand-in for San Francisco in that show, and this library made an appearance in a few scenes. Unfortunately, I don't think our recycling bins were featured in the shoot though. So a little bit about the existing situation there. As you can see in the photo, the typical setup was these chrome garbage receptacles. There's a very large number of these receptacles in the library. In many of the areas, the cans were placed very closely together. Sometimes cans were only 10 or 15 feet apart. And I was told by our custodial managers at the time that due to littering on the tables, over time, more and more cans had been added to try to combat the littering issue, but that was met with partial success. Also in the library, we have found a kind of a smattering of recycling bins, typically the paper recycling bins co-located with photocopiers. So that was the existing situation. Now, what we are proposing as part of our new program was to install multi-stream recycling stations in that space and remove the garbage cans. And so what our proposal for that entire library was installation of 10 of these stations that you can see in the photo. They're 4-stream recycling stations. They're quite large and brightly colored, so they look quite different than the old garbage cans. Now, some of the concerns that were raised at the time were, again, around litter in the library. By removing the garbage cans, would we exacerbate a litter problem? Of course, Custodial was also concerned about their collection process and how this new process was going to affect them. Was it going to require extra staff time that would go over and above their existing job descriptions? Space was a consideration as well. As you can see, these stations have a big footprint, and appearance-wise, again, they look very different. And finally, with the inclusion of our food scraps stream in that station, there was concerns about nuisances like odors and flies, and especially considering that the library had a no food policy in certain areas. So what we found in going through this pilot was that there's really 2 important parts that we felt were quite key to making it a success. One is the communications plan and the materials associated with that, and also engaging with custodial services and building administrators. So being proactive and working together with custodial and the administrators well ahead of the start of the pilot was very essential. This allowed us to work through concerns and come up with a plan that acknowledged and managed the different risks and concerns that they had. On the communication side, the communications plan was really aimed at the library users to help explain the reason for the changes, orient them to the new system, and minimize any complaints that they might make to the library staff, and also more broadly to start building support for the new zero waste program. In terms of results, you can see a chart there showing our diversion experience. So we were able to increase the diversion in the library from around 20% to close to 50%. And at the same time, we did not see any increase in litter, which was one of the chief concerns. On the custodial effort side, they did have to do a fair bit of homework and trial and error to figure out their new collection process with these new stations. But at the end of the day, after a period of adjustment time and optimization, they did determine that their net effort was essentially the same after those adjustments were made. So that was a success in terms of being able to accommodate the collection changes within their existing job duties. And then following the pilot, we also began to roll out this same process for a number of other buildings, and that continued over a period of time. A couple of other things to note here with our experiences on the pilot. One was that on the litter side, we found that users had been leaving their drink containers on tables when they left. And this was one of the big issues that Custodial had flagged for us. We also see this outdoors, by the way, which I'll talk about in a minute. But again, what we determined after the pilot was that we believe anyway that part of the reason that people were leaving their beverage containers on the tables was that there were no container recycling bins in the library and people actually wanted to recycle them. So rather than place them in the garbage, they would leave them behind for Custodial. That is one reason why the arrival of the recycling stations didn't have a negative impact on litter. In fact, it was probably overall a positive impact. The other thing to note is that despite the success of the pilot, there's definitely a learning curve for the end users as well in terms of understanding how to use the stations. And that really comes back to the education part, as well as engagement to creating a good transition. So, the education by itself is not enough to ensure that the waste is going to be segregated very well, but it's a start, and having that infrastructure in place is absolutely essential. Subsequent to this pilot, one of the other things we did was for classrooms, we actually removed all the solo garbage cans from classrooms in favor of having the recycling stations in the adjacent hallway. And our experience in the classrooms has been similar in that we haven't had any new litter problems. We haven't had any worsening of litter problems. People have gotten used to this new system of having the recycling stations in the hallways. So as I mentioned, though, despite all this work, there are still some ongoing issues with proper sorting of waste and contamination of food scraps, which I'll touch on. But for now, I'll shift over to talking about the outdoor public realm and the changes that were made there. So in the outdoor public realm, we had in 2015, 2016, about 185 solo garbage cans across the campus. You can see an example of one of those on the left side of your slide. On the right side, it's probably pretty tough to make out, but that's actually a GIS map that we created through an inventory showing the locations of every garbage can on campus. So you can see there's an awful lot of them. Each of the small circles is one unit. And, kind of similar to the indoor situation, garbage cans were progressively added outdoors as the campus became busier, and also in an effort to control litter. And in some cases, if you have a very busy building, near the door of that building, you might find up to 5 garbage cans kind of spread around near the entrance. So giving a kind of a cluttered appearance. Now, the building operations who do our waste management, they don't service all the garbage cans on campus. Some of them are actually served by ancillaries like student housing or athletics departments, but they do the majority of them. Looking at some of the issues associated with those outdoor garbage cans, there was already a number of issues happening. One of them was overflows. So, for example, due to missing a collection event, or perhaps a special outdoor event involving a large number of students would create overflows in the outdoor bins. And then these overflows have kind of been exacerbated by a couple things. One of them is we have a lot of wildlife on campus, especially birds, seagulls, crows, and kind of seems like we're the squirrel capital of Canada here. And all these animals, when the bins are full or overflowing, they just exacerbate the problem, pulling out materials and bags and making more of a mess due to the open nature of the cans. And then, of course, the fact that we've just seen a steady increase in the number of single-use disposable items like coffee cups, You can see an example there where they're just taking up so much volume in the outdoor bins. And lastly, just the general messiness around these bins. They will often leak liquids out from the coffee cups or other beverages. So a lot of messiness. We've also seen this tendency, you can see in the bottom picture, of where people are placing their drink containers actually on top of the bins, top of the cans. And our assumption is that generally that's because people are kind of hoping that those things can be recycled, even though there's no recycling bin there. So that kind of points to the fact that there was a demand for recycling even before we started to roll out the outdoor program. So this is a view of our first couple of trials for our outdoor stations a few years ago. The stations were 3 to 4 streams. The picture on the top was the first model that we used. And interesting to note is the 3 streams that we originally had were paper recycling, container recycling, and garbage. What we found over trialing that was that the amount of paper that was being generated in the outdoor public areas was really quite minimal and was far, far less than the other streams. So what we did is we converted over the paper stream to a food scrap stream, and we've used that going forward because the quantity of food scraps is far greater than the quantity of paper. Now I'll touch in a minute on how that went. The lower picture, you can see we also piloted big belly solar stations. We only had 2 or 3 of these, and we still have them on campus, but we have since moved to a different design, which I'll talk about in a minute. But at the end of the day, we used a similar approach as indoors, which was to replace multiple garbage cans and with one station, and we would typically replace anywhere from 3 to 5 outdoor garbage cans with one of the new stations. So we're consolidating into a smaller number of locations and creating a much larger collection volume at those points. Some of the new stations have a capacity of up to 200 gallons, so far, far greater than the garbage cans. On the waste management side and operations, the kind of concerns that existed were, again, around litter. If we reduce the number of cans, are we going to create more of a litter problem? What about the changes in processes for collection from these 3 streams instead of 1? What's the effort going to look like? How is that going to change the collection program? And one of the concerns, for example, was our recycling truck, which is a heavy collection vehicle, could not access many of the locations along sidewalks. And so they had to use a smaller vehicle for that. So those were some of the concerns that were raised and we had to work through. But overall, we had a pretty good success with these pilots. We did not see any significant increases in litter. One of the big benefits is that the waste is more enclosed than it was in the garbage cans, so much less subject to animals pulling materials out because of the large capacity, a little more ability to deal with volume and less overflow issues. And I think the public and the students and the campus users were happy about having better access to recycling and food scraps collection across the campus. So those are all pluses of the program and our experience with the initial rollout. And one of the ongoing issues is that because we have this food scrap stream in all of the outdoor stations, it's been a bit of an experiment, to be honest. In the indoor situation, it's better than this. In the outdoor situation, we still have very significant contamination of the food scrap stream with different materials like drink containers, plastic bags, and so on. So we're still trying to determine if we can overcome that problem. We've been working on different strategies. Much of the material, unfortunately, that we collect from the food scraps bins outdoors, we are not able to process in our in-vessel composting facility because of the contamination, but we're still working on that, and we're probably will give it at least another year or so, at which time we'll determine if we need to make any major changes there. So coming up to my last slide here, our next steps are that we're going to continue to roll out the new stations outdoors. We've already essentially covered all of the indoor areas with the recycling stations. Outdoors, we have a little ways to go. I think we're running at about 16 multi-stream stations in the outdoor realm. I think we have about another 10 planned in the next year, with the goal of eventually getting to the point where we have essentially no solo garbage cans outdoors. And relating to that issue, in some areas, garbage cans are not just being replaced. Some locations we found just seem to be a source of litter rather than a solution to litter. And there are cases where there's a solo garbage can that is in an area where we just don't feel requires servicing, and so we'll just remove it. And in cases like that, I think that this kind of new model is becoming more acceptable to campus users over time, as they kind of buy into the idea that they need to be more responsible for their own waste. And that includes making a little bit of extra effort to recycle rather than littering or committing it to a landfill. So that program is continuing. We'll continue to install and continue to monitor the food scraps contamination, the litter situation, and revisit it in the next 1 to 2 years to see what changes and adjustments we need to make. That brings me to the end of my slides, wraps up my presentation. My contact information is on the slide there, and I'll be happy to answer any questions when we get to that point.
Thank you, Bud. We have a few questions right now for you. When it came to funding the new systems of bins, especially around different parts of campus, whether they be the library or maybe some outdoor bins that weren't serviced from a kind of central perspective, how were those bins put into place, and how was that funding process sorted out on your campus?
Are you speaking to indoor bins, outdoor bins, or both?
First, the question was about the indoor bins, but I know you did say that some outdoor bins were serviced by other ancillary departments. So maybe that, if it's connected, then of course.
Right. So for the indoor bins, I mean, the budget for purchasing these bins was quite significant. They're pretty expensive, and most of the ones we've put in are custom made. So that was a big hurdle to get over, the funding side of things. Part of what we did was we created a little bit of a business case. Part of that was the pilot to show that it was not going to increase the custodial effort. But the other bigger part was looking at what's the net benefit to the university. At the time when we started that project, the economics for recycling and composting were actually a little bit better, and we were able to show that we could reduce some of our operational costs through being able to recycle and compost rather than landfill. Now the economics have shifted a bit, and they're not quite as attractive as they were then. But we did essentially take this plan to the executive, say this was important to meet our target in the zero waste plan, and there's some offsetting of costs. So we were able to get centralized funding for essentially rolling out all of the bins into the buildings indoors. For outdoors, it's been a little bit different in that it's been a slower, more organic process, and that funding was not part of the kind of central funding for the plan, and has been being done incrementally out of the building operations budget, so a few stations each year kind of thing. In some cases, we're actually funding the installation of the outdoor stations through development projects. So if we have a new construction project, we've mandated that the building developer or owner actually has to pay for the installation of the station that would be located on, say, on the street in front of the building. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. I'll let some piecemeal things, some things put together, and mandating in the future. I think good strategies. for composting and having that experiment of compost on campus, there's a question about wondering if you composted on the campus, kind of like an in-house operation, or what it's like getting that done outside with the contamination and the experiment going on there.
Yeah, we currently have an in-vessel facility of our own on campus. So generally speaking, our material is processed on campus. And however, one of the challenges is that plant was designed, originally the program was serving back of house, and we've expanded it to all these public locations and front of house. And that's actually been largely related to the increased contamination. So the plant is not able to deal with the contamination very well. So we're in a process right now to look at different options. So we're looking at, should we be upgrading our plant to be able to accommodate the contamination better, or should we be moving to an off-campus processor that their technology allows them to deal with that material better. So we're kind of in this process of determining what the next steps are going to be.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer. And then finally, there's a question about how do we calculate the number of stations to be placed around campus? And I know you've taken maybe like some clutter bins from around campus and kind of centralized them. People are wondering what the thought process was and where to put those and how much to downsize.
Right. In terms of the number, that was really based on, I guess it was somewhat trial and error with the pilot, where we looked at our main corridor through campus called Main Mall. We decided that would be the scope, and we took 6 recycling stations and spaced them out in such a way that we replaced, like I mentioned, 3 to 5 garbage cans for each one, kind of on the principle that we create a reasonable walking distance between the stations and also visibility. So regardless of where you're standing, you should be able to see one. So that was kind of the way that we started with the pilot, and then we just monitored the litter, looked at the feedback we were getting from users to get a feel for whether we were in the ballpark. And as it turns out, we were in the ballpark, and we've kind of continued that same philosophy as we've gone along. So that's worked pretty well. There was actually a move at one time at the beginning to look at, should we actually remove all of the garbage and recycling from the outdoor public realm and rely on the indoor stations, but later determined that that would not be feasible, partly because the buildings aren't always open, and partly because a lot of people eat their food outside and various other things, so for convenience.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Bud. Any further questions, we can loop back around at the very end for Bud, but for right now, we're going to move on to our next presenter. Tom Lembo is a passionate and knowledgeable waste and recycling professional with over 10 years of experience helping organizations around the world set up successful recycling programs. Tom's industry expertise is valued and sought out in speaking engagements, including the 2010 Earth Day celebrations inside the Pentagon. Tom's hands-on experience through numerous on-site visits and waste audits allows him to develop solutions that are designed to help organization programs to be effective and successful. With that, take it away, Tom.
Thank you, Eric. And Bud, that was a tremendous presentation. I'm going to touch on a few of the things you talked about, and we do have a lot of similar findings. So mine is called, So You Want to Order a Bin? Asking the right questions to optimize program success. So what's the traditional method for ordering a recycling container? For many, you do a Google search, you find a few companies that have a product that you love, you compare prices and features, purchase the container. Sounds simple, right? But many don't realize the complexities and careful planning that goes into a successful recycling program. And time again, we see people who have the best of intentions fail with their program just because they didn't take into consideration a few things. So, no question, this is a niche topic, one that I'm hoping I can put a fresh perspective on. We're going to look at a couple things, best practices around culture and behavior, and key questions as it comes to planning. So these are the 4 areas we're going to focus on, and because I enjoy hearing myself talk, I'll read them. Is there a standard program in place? Who else needs to know? What are the financial considerations? And then, of course, the most ominous one, what could possibly go wrong? So whenever you're starting a recycling program, the first step is always to determine how many streams you're going to collect. You should always consult with your waste hauler, find out what they can collect, but not only what they can collect today, what future products are going to be able to be collected. So can organics come into play, something like that. We've been in the business for over 30 years, and 30 years ago, they wanted you to separate 8 streams. They wanted you to separate your clear glass from your dark glass, your yellow paper from your white paper, and so on and so on. And then over the years, it kind of got down to 3, cans and bottles, paper, and waste. Then commingled recycling came in, so it was down to 2, organics up to 3. We know everything that's going on with China sword may cause us to start separating our commodities again. So the point is, what your program looks like today is going to be completely different than what it looks like a couple years from now, and it's certainly different than what it looks like 10 years from now. So planning to collect the right streams today, but also having the flexibility to collect whatever comes online in the coming years is critical. So our different buildings collecting different items. Now I know walking through a lot of campuses, you might go into the library and see a recycling container that's collecting 3 streams that has a certain degree of messaging on it. You take a walk through the athletic center, different type of container, different number of streams, different messaging. You go outside, same thing. It's really important to standardize the program. So no matter where you are on that facility, you're getting the same message. You're collecting the same streams, and you know where everything goes. So one of the other questions that is often asked is, where are we going to put them? And that also comes to something Bud talked about, is how many do I need? I know someone asked the question. So we do this a number of different ways. You check the flow of the traffic. You see where the busy areas are, entrances, exits. You engage the janitorial staff, and we're going to talk about the janitorial staff a lot, because they're really a key component as to the success of your program, and they also hold a lot of vital information. So they have a good understanding, and our rule of thumb, less is more. So the less amount of containers you can get away with, the better. One of the things we often see with programs is they buy new recycling containers, and as you're walking through and see these beautiful programs, you find what we call a rogue container or a rogue waste container just randomly sitting in a hallway or next to something. And we always ask, why are these here? And nobody seems to know. But those really kill your program because they're catch-alls for everything. So you really got to make sure all the existing rogue containers are moved. So one of the things that Bud brought up too was classroom versus no classroom. We're finding the same findings, that more and more schools are taking bins out of the classroom. They're finding that students aren't leaving too much waste on the desks. There certainly hasn't been a litter issue. It's saving janitorial staff time and money because they don't have to go to room. So far, the only people we're seeing complain about it are the professors who sit in the classroom all day and now have to leave the classroom to dispose of their waste. So it's been successful in that sense. So for those of you who are asking me, how many do I need, and saying, Tom, you haven't told me anything that I can use yet, we have a simple rule of thumb. It's called our 50-50 method, and it's usually 1 bin per 50 people per 50 steps. So in certain areas, you don't want people to have to walk more than 50 steps to get to a recycling container, and your average recycling container can usually hold enough to accommodate 50 people, with a lot of factors. Are they being changed every day? It's almost like asking how long is a string, but a good rule of thumb, a general rule of thumb, is 50 and 50. Again, Bud talked about sizing the bins. Again, it comes to data collection, it comes to visual audits, it comes to how often that they're changed, doing pilots to determine that. but also what streams are collecting faster than others. You know, is your recycling stream collecting more than your waste stream? Those are all different types of things you have to monitor. One thing that we run into a lot, and it's killed a bunch of programs, is are there aesthetic requirements across campus? So a lot of big schools have what we call design cops. And, you know, it's not so much going online and purchasing a bin, it's does the bin meet the necessary aesthetic requirements of the school? A lot of people, unfortunately, don't think of that when they are purchasing containers, and sometimes they can end up buying a container that can't be used in the facility. So it's always important to check with architecture team or whoever's on staff that handles the design and making sure that the bin is compliant to meet those standards. The next, you know, sometimes it's a confusing thing. People say, I need 3 bins. And it's like, do you need 3 bins for collection, or do you need 3 actual waste containers? So clarifying the number of streams versus the number of containers is also helpful when searching for a container. But type of graphics is something I'm going to spend a lot of time on. And this is a slide that I took this picture actually about 10 years ago. So I want everybody to picture themselves standing in front of that recycling container with that cup in their hand. And say you're the most passionate person in the world and you want to do the right thing. Do you know where that cup goes? And how discouraging is it when you see a cup in every single one of those compartments? And this is what we call, you know, basically an ineffective container, and why the next couple slides about what makes a container effective are going to be important, because really there's no right answer, and literally everything in that container will probably end up in a landfill. So, cues. What makes a recycling container effective? It's the visual cues that you provide, okay? It's graphics, and you can talk about, you know, graphics as opposed to just words or pictograms. Our studies show that having actual images of actual products, specifically if they're used on the campus, increases your diversion rate by 51%. So stream identification, then you hit them again with color-coded openings, and again, standardized across campus. So blue for recycling, green for compost. You know, some people have green for, you know, it doesn't matter as long as it's consistent, right? Branding of the container, branding of your program, communicating to the people, just like they showed in the previous slide, Bud's presentation with the sorted out graphics. I thought they were a very good way to communicate to the staff, and promoting your program success. And then also consolidation of a bin. So keeping all the streams together so you don't have one bin in one corner and another bin in another corner, waste in one corner, recycling in it. Human nature is going to say, I'm just going to go to one container and I'm going to put everything in there. So our studies show that with all these cues, you have 2 to 3 seconds to get someone's attention. When they're standing in front of a bin with something in their hand, 2 to 3 seconds is all you get to help them make that right choice. And my mantra has always been, people want to do the right thing, you just have to make it very, very easy for them to do it. So what's the impact of standardization? You can see on the left-hand side, you've got a program that's kind of been picked and grown as needed, hasn't been well thought out, and sends a really bad message. I mean, even if you look at the bottom left, do I really know which ones? I mean, I can assume that the blue is recycling, but the middle one, is that organics, or and are they even collecting organics? The other one on the top left is poorly messaged, so again, you don't really know what goes where. If you look at the right, you can have different styles of bins, you can have different sizes of bins, as long as you keep the messaging consistent, as long as you keep the visual cues that we spoke about in the previous slide consistent, you're going to see incredible success with your program. So, who else needs to know? When you're starting a recycling program, who needs to know? Or when you're purchasing a container, who do you have to inform? You know, senior management. Do you have the buy-in of senior management that they're supporting the program, that you're going to have their support in rolling a program out? Are there any approvals that are required? Unions. Oftentimes with your janitorial staff, if you're going from a non-recycling program to a recycling program where you're collecting compost and organics, you've technically just tripled their workload. I mean, they have to collect it, they have to sort it, they have to bring it to the dumpsters and the compactors in the back. In many cases, their union contracts won't even allow it. So even if you want to start a recycling program, you may be bound by by union contracts for your janitorial staff. So it's something worth looking into. Again, architects, we talk about the design cops. Are there designs in place that you have to use certain colors, certain materials, certain styles? It's worth looking at. Training the custodial staff. We have seen many recycling programs fail because they didn't get the buy-in of the custodial staff first. So, training them as to what you're trying to do, getting them involved in the purchase of the container, the ergonomics of the container, how it's serviced, liner versus pulling it out through the top. How does it flow from the waste can to the back of house where they bring it to the compactors and the dumpsters? Is it easy for them? You'll find their input very valuable, and you'll also find that the program works a lot better with their buy-in. We've also had recycling programs completely destroyed by fire marshals because people went out and they bought the wrong bin. Either it was of a material that wasn't approved by the fire marshal, or because it stuck out too far in the hallway and created a problem, or because it needed to be hung up on a wall. So it's always important to consult your fire marshal before starting a recycling program, because if the bins get there and they walk through and they don't see it, number one, they're going to be upset that they weren't consulted, and number two, they'll literally have the power to pull those bins off the floor. And in many cases, we find they interpret the codes as best suits them. So something to definitely consider. Students, Bud touched on this with communicating to them, getting their buy-in, making sure it's easy for them to make the right choice. All these kind of things will help, succeed, make your program succeed. The sustainability department, if you're a standalone department and there is already a sustainability coordinator or director of sustainability on staff, then it's always important to consult them. We do standardized recycling programs for over 200 colleges and universities across North America, and it's very challenging because the poor sustainability coordinator, who's usually a team of one, is responsible for 15, 20 departments that don't necessarily consult with them before they purchase a container. So, our job, when possible, is to be the police to say, no, this is the kind of container that you need to buy. This is the program that they're trying to set out. Let's try to keep it consistent. But it's very difficult for that sustainability department or person to keep that consistent without the buy-in from the other departments. In finance, it's how do you fund the program? Do you need to show a return on investment? Are there grants possible? Do you have access to purchase containers through the environmental fees that students have to pay with their tuition? So how is it funded, and what type of work do you have to do in order to get funding or financing? Which leads us right into financial considerations. So are there grants available? In many cases, there's some national grants, there's a lot of state grants and community grants, some university grants. Central collection, which is becoming a new paradigm shift that I'm sure most of you are aware of. It's removing desk-side containers in offices and in classrooms and just having one bin outside that everybody has to bring their waste to. It is a real money saver when you talk about janitorial time and even things like plastic bags cost. There's a huge ROI. Also, what is your waste hauler going to do for you? Is there any commodities that are worth any money? I know we're in a bad time to necessarily discuss that, but can you get net zero pickups? Is there a benefit from reducing the amount of times that dumpster or compactor full of waste gets picked up and converting that to recycling and or compost? And again, the final thing, and I can't stress this enough, and Bud pointed it out and did a tremendous job, is always start with a pilot. Any of our clients, I would never let them buy 300 recycling containers all at once and roll it out. It's so critical to start small, gain data, get all different kinds of experiences, get feedback from everybody, see how well containers hold up. All those types of things are critical. You'll get the data you need and probably find that you're going to tweak it 5, 6, 7, or 8 times before you're ready to roll out a complete program. So again, pilot's critical, can't stress that enough. So what could possibly go wrong? And these are the things that people come to us and say, geez, we never thought of that. So one of the things we hear is, Oh, after hours, we rent out one of the rooms, and it's rented to XYZ organization, and they left a mess. So who's responsible for cleaning that out? We didn't realize that, and the bins weren't big enough to do that. Sporting events, things like that, things where you generally generate more waste or recycling than you normally would. Flaps on containers. Now, flaps on containers are terrific. They help keep the smell down. Fruit flies, especially if your bins aren't being serviced every day. But then the feedback you get is, I'm not going to touch that thing, so I'm not going to put my waste in there. And then you'll see people leaving it on top or the side or things of that nature. One of the things Bud also pointed out, animals, squirrels, insects, depending on the, bears, everything. So making sure the containers can handle that, making sure they are have flaps on them or, strong enough to handle any type of vermin infestation. There's always health and safety factors, sharp edges, height. We've had situations where people have bought round containers for outside only to find the kids, put them on their side and start rolling them down hills and all different kinds of things. So crazy stuff happens at night on some of those campuses, as you're all aware of. So it's keeping mindful of that and thinking ahead about what could possibly happen. How much time is it to put the bins together, to retrofit them if your program changes? How much time does it take the janitorial staff to actually service it, removing the liner, putting the new bag in, or hanging the bag? Are there ergonomic issues as far as how it's serviced? They don't have to lift up too much weight. We have some people who want a paper slot that's 50 or 60 gallons, and we think to ourselves, who's the poor custodian who's got to pick up that bag? It doesn't comply with guidelines. So right sizing it for not only your capacity but for ergonomic issues is critical. Are there any ADA requirements on your bins? Can you make the bins any better as far as graphics go? Make them easier to communicate, and of course future ready, because as I mentioned earlier, change is inevitable. And what your program looks like today is going to be completely different than what it looks like tomorrow or several years down the road. So to build in that kind of flexibility, you're going to save yourself a lot of time and headaches. So that's essentially it. If there's any questions, please feel free to reach out. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tom. There are some questions here about some of the studies you cited during the presentation, including some about improving rates with pictograms up to 51%, and just other sources for those best practice research results. I think sharing those, I think people would like to have those as a research.
Yeah, and we have that. I think I have my marketing team around me here, so I'm not going to speak out of tune, but I think we have that on our website. But we've done two studies, one with the University of Toronto and one with the University of Missouri, on graphics and the different styles of graphics and how people react to them. So we did one that just had words, we did one that had pictograms, and we did one that had actual images. And then the data that's in those reports will show the success of moving from one to another. So somehow, Eric, maybe you can help me, we can make that available to the people listening. But I'm just not 100% sure how. I know it's on our website somewhere, but maybe it's some information I can send you and you can send out, Eric?
I think it would be great if people could contact you directly. Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, I don't think my email was on there, but should I just give my email over the...
We can share it at the end if you're ready to do that. That'd be great. That would be awesome. Yes, and then finally, there's a question for you, Tom, about advice on liquids and ice, including contributing to weight. Maybe studies that show that up to 20% of landfill weight was liquids, and how that might be a problem to approach using the right infrastructure.
So liquid capture is probably something in the last 2 or 3 years that it's always been a problem, but I think it's something that people are finally starting to get around and acknowledge. So yeah, it's true that up to so much of your waste stream can be weight, and of course you get paid by the weight. Also, if you have all kinds of water, coffee in your recycling stream, then that contaminates your stream. We've actually working with a couple companies that are doing works with Starbucks and Tim Hortons, for those of you who are Canadian have heard of them, and we are trying to capture the liquid from the coffee cups before the coffee cups go into the waste stream or recycling stream. So we've actually come up with some units that collect it. Two issues. Number one, unless you have a drain handy, unless you can hook that liquid capture up to a drain, it's a bit of a servicing nightmare in the sense that you have a jug that's anywhere from 5 to 10 gallons that fills up every couple of days that the janitorial staff has to stay on top of. And if they don't, then obviously it's going to overflow. So there's a definite servicing challenge. But we have been working with a lot of different schools and private businesses, quite frankly, to come up with better ways to get the liquid out of the trash. And I'd be happy to share those with people too.
Okay, thank you so much. But Tom, that was great, very informative. And if there are any other questions for Tom that roll in later, then we'll loop back around to those at the end. There will be a longer Q&A session available for people who might come up with things later on. So thank you, Tom. We're gonna move on. Our next presenter is Darci Pellom. Darci is a landscape architect at Indiana University in the Capital Projects Office, working there for almost 8 years. She received a bachelor's degree in landscape architecture from Purdue University School of Agriculture. Before Indiana University, Darci worked for private engineering firms focusing on grading and drainage design, including green infrastructure for a variety of sites around the Midwest. While at IUPUI, she decided to return to school and will complete an MPA degree with a concentration in environmental policy and sustainability from IUPUI in May 2020. Her primary responsibility is the IUPUI campus, which allows her to get involved in many different initiatives and operations related to sustainability on the campus. So with that, we'll hand it over to Darci.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Darci Pellom, and like Eric said, I'm with our Capital Projects Office at Indiana University. And Indiana IUPUI is one of 7 campuses in the Indiana University system, and our office takes care of all of those. But like I said, I'm located at IUPUI because I live in Indianapolis, and so I'm excited that I get to get in depth with some of the projects that our sustainability office has at IUPUI. So IUPUI is an urban campus located on the west side of downtown Indianapolis. It encompasses about 330 acres with another 50 acres on the north campus across the Fall Creek. It has a total student population of just over 30,000, with 21,000 of those being undergraduates. And only about 12% of the student body lives on campus. So we have a high commuter campus population that we work with, where parking in the downtown area is difficult. So they come about 9 o'clock in the morning, stay all day, and leave about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So I'm not sure how our project got started initially. Our sustainability office was looking at increasing recycling on our campus, particularly in the outdoor bins. And so Jessica Davis, our director, got my office together with the grounds and asking what can we do to look at our outdoor bins. I was already looking to try to formalize the standard outdoor trash cans and strategic placement of those at IUPUI. They are expensive, and because no written standard had been developed, they were not getting included in new and renovated spaces. And at the same time, grounds was looking at the number of man hours spent on different activities, as we've added some significant size and intensive landscapes on the campus in the last 5 years, including green infrastructure, which takes some intensive maintenance until established over a 3-year period. And so we came up with our goals to reduce the number and types of waste bins. What do we have on campus? How many are there? We had a pretty good GIS map to start, and using interns in our GIS and sustainability office, we were able to update that map. And you can see on this slide a little sampling of the exterior bins that we had and the ones that we actually ended up with. And then, so how do we understand the littering behavior of campus community and visitors? We are serving, and what are their needs? IUPUI has 2 hospitals on campus that we provide parking for. We have visitors to campus clinics, events and conferences, students, staff, and faculty. And so how do they use our campus and our campus bins as well? Identify a new architectural standard, and then place new bins in appropriate locations. And so IUPUI before, you can see our map here. We had over 300 exterior waste bins. IUPUI just celebrated their 50-year anniversary. So as we grew, we just put trash cans in areas where we thought they were needed. And so we have a system-wide architectural standard, but again, it's not as formalized as it is on some of our other campuses. So we had mismatched bins. They were placed in random places. And so we decided to do some litter observations. Like the previous presenter said, we have sporting events. We had Indy 11, our professional soccer team, playing on our campus for 3 years, hospital visitors and garages, student residence halls, people or folks who would clean out their cars in the parking lots, and outdoor seating and eating. So those were the observations that we had determined allowed the misplace of bins. We only had 4 paired with recycle bins, and none of those were the campus standard. And our grounds folks were seeing some injuries from heavy liners due to rain collection because there was no bonnet on them. The old standard was 46 gallons, so it got pretty heavy, and they were poking holes in the liners to be able to get the rainwater that gotten in there out, and that led to litter or trash on our grounds, being that the bins were contaminated. And then we had pests to deal with, odors in the summer, particularly in those trash cans that didn't get replaced every day. And then finally, what the other presenters have said, these trash cans are expensive. And so we wanted to make sure with labor cost and replacement costs that we were being smart with our money. And the campus grounds at the time was divided into 7 zones with 2 staff grounds folks in each zone. And they were spending up to 2 hours a day driving around in carts picking up this trash. And then once they picked up the trash, they were also picking up litter on the ground. So how can we make sure that these bins are long lasting, aesthetically pleasing, and not to have to replace 300 of them, because that was projected to cost us up to $300,000 just for the exterior bins. So our process was pretty informal. We had heard about other universities and colleges trying total elimination of exterior bins. So we started with our Zone 1, which is our heaviest undergraduate academic area, for 30 days in 2018 in October. And we used our grounds folks and our campus facilities hotline for complaints to let us know if there were any uptick in litter. And we didn't receive any from the grounds folks, and 1 complaint from our library staff, which we then put in a litter container back in there. And so the removal expanded to the entire campus by January 2019. We're still early, as you can tell, in this process. So here is IUPUI after. We now have under 20 exterior waste bins. We removed them from all the parking lots and most of the buildings. what we have here in order to do this is a robust interior trash and recycling program. And so what we did is move those buildings that didn't have trash and recycling inside the front door. We moved cans so they could be. So when people did bring their trash in, they had a can immediately inside the doors and a recycle bin paired with that. Our interior custodial folks are much more adept at handling that than our grounds folks. And then in our parking garages as well, we looked at those, and we have 13 garages on campus that are all automated. And so we have a lot of ticket spitters and pay on foot stations that accumulate paper around those. And so we were able to standardize to this exterior bin that you see on the slide. And we haven't purchased any of those yet because we're still kind of waiting to see, you know, if the bins that we have are enough. How often are our grounds folks having to change those? Do we need an additional bin somewhere in the vicinity? We put them in our outdoor eating areas and seating areas where we have a high population of students that bring their lunches and or purchase and walk to our destinations. We chose the bins that were capped to prevent rain accumulation. We were a little concerned about the pizza boxes and things like that being stacked on them, but we have 2 of these cans out in our Lockfield Green area on campus, and we haven't had that issue yet. It's much better for contamination and pests. The waste management moved to the interior spaces, like I mentioned. And then our grounds folks are freed up to do campus beautification areas instead of having to continually pick up trash as a standard labor for them. And then that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Darci. Thank you so much for sharing that experience. Obviously very impressive, the amount of reduction you saw from the beginning of the project to the end there. Some questions here for you. You mentioned connecting with the Director of Sustainability on this in the connection with the Capital Projects Office. Do you have any recommendations for recycling and sustainability professionals about making those connections collaboratively, how to contact and work with people in a similar position on their own campus to bring up these kinds of issues?
I am one of those aesthetic landscape architects who you need to check with in order to determine what bins you have on campus. And I am always willing and open to listen to any suggestions and ideas that our sustainability folks have to increase recycling and reduce bins. So I think you just reach out and say, I have an idea about our waste cans, you know, outside. What do you think? On our Bloomington campus, because we have about 1,500 acres, we have to have exterior bins out there. So now what we're looking at is, instead of just having exterior trash cans, are there strategic areas where we can pair those with our recycling bins, like our athletics and outside of our library and business SPIA, which is a large school on the Bloomington campus. So I think you'll find those folks in the capital projects are always, or the design community is always looking at ways to make the campus more aesthetically pleasing, you know, easier for users and things like that. So I would just reach out and give them your ideas.
Okay, that sounds great. And then also for bins that you mentioned might not be designed as well, but what would you suggest for a bin that has already been standardized on campus, but might be still accumulating rainwater or isn't as well designed? How would you approach the sustainability folks to design effectively and get the standard changed?
We actually changed the standard at IUPUI. We had a system-wide standard, which was the 46 gallon, and we preferred not to have the rain bonnet on it. And so what I looked at is do we have issues with injuries in our grounds folks for pulling these really heavy bags out? And we did. And then another issue we have is salt. The salt was eating the bottom of the trash cans that sat flush on the ground. And so we went with one that had a leg on it for minimal contact. And then we changed the color because we're a more urban university than our Bloomington and other regional counterparts. And so we wanted that kind of urban feel to it. So it may be hard. I think our old trash cans have a rain bonnet that you can add to the cans, or over a period of time, is there a chance to trade out these trash cans for an equally aesthetically pleasing can with these features that will make the can last longer, maintenance lower, and maybe cost lower as far as labor?
Absolutely. And then finally, for you, Darci, do you believe that people in your position typically would reach out to the sustainability folks preemptively when working on a project like this, or is it critical for the sustainability/recycling more oriented professionals to seek them out?
I would say that I was thinking about this campus standard and trash cans for a long time, and I would talk to my colleagues about it, but I didn't necessarily think, here's a great partner, I should reach out to sustainability. So I would say I need to reach out to sustainability more, but I certainly appreciate the grounds folks and the sustainability folks who reach out to me and say, hey, we have this idea, because sometimes I get bogged down in construction projects and things like that related to that I forget to think about the operations and maintenance on campus. And so it's nice for others to reach out to me and say, we have an idea, we've been thinking about this, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. That collaboration between different parts of campus and different people who need to get that approval, I think, has been a running theme throughout this whole presentation. So thank you again, Darci. If there's any other questions that we'd like to ask of the webinar panel today, make sure to drop those below. We'll sort through some of those now. For the first one, there's a question for Bud here, especially since it was mentioned later on about parking lots in Darci's presentation and garages. This person asked, we have outdoor trash bins on every floor of every garage. We have at almost every exit. How have you, Bud, addressed garages or parking lots in your efforts?
Yeah, so I guess one point is that we have almost no surface lots anymore. Mostly we're multi-level parking. And in those lots, they're actually managed by our parking department. And what they have done is they were finding litter issues in their parking garages. And so what they've done is placed, they kind of came up with some semi-custom low-cost bins that we worked with them on with our standard signage, and they place a set of these at the exits of the parking garage, the pedestrian exits. So they have probably 1 to 2 sets for each multi-level garage, but they don't have them on every level. That's typically at ground level.
Okay. And this next question, I guess, is for anyone. Rather than parking garages, what about transit stations, and where people are sometimes waiting or eating or waiting for transportation? How has that appeared in your work, and maybe some ideas to work through those issues?
I can probably speak to that because we're actually working with our Indigo partners right now. They have an ordinance to hang trash cans on all of their bus shelters, but unfortunately they're small cans that get filled pretty quickly and they don't have liners in them. So we find coffee and other liquids being spilt around them. So we are working with them to take their small unlined can off of their panels and put our campus standard with recycling next to the bus shelters. And then we will use our folks to empty those and maintain those areas. And then we had the same thing, to go back to the last question, with our parking lots and our parking garages. We took all our cans out of our parking lots and didn't get too much pushback from them. We also did the same as what Bud said, and we followed our pay on foot stations and put cans and recycling bins next to those at all the exits, which required us to change the way our garage cleaning folks came through, and we had to accommodate their vehicle for our garages so that they could collect the trash and then take it to the dumpsters.
Okay, thank you both for tackling that one. We have a question for Tom next. This person is wondering, how does the waste hauler net zero pickup work? Is this a contractual agreement or an informal goal?
Thank you. So it's actually a real geographic question. It's a question based on the value of commodities, and just by researching different waste hauling companies and of course the volume that you generate. So a lot of people are locked into a waste hauling contract, but say the contract's coming up, it's nice to put that in there or to see what they're willing to do as far as the costs to remove your recycling. Like, hopefully it's less than waste. In an ideal world today, it's revenue neutral, and hopefully in the future, like in the past, you could actually get money back for it. It's just becoming more and more difficult. So really it's a consultation with your waste hauler. It's going to partially depend on the area of the country that you live in, and if they have any markets for those commodities. So like I said, the goal is always to shoot at the very minimum for revenue neutral recycling haulage fee, but again, that has to be negotiated with your hauler.
Thank you for that one, Tom. Doesn't seem like there are any more lingering questions for everyone. So we'll move on and talk about upcoming webinars and events following this program. The College and University Recycling Coalition's own campus recycling workshop is for AASHE is coming up for Sunday, October 27th, which will be an amazing program that we'd like to see some of you all at. It's 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. If you're going to AASHE's annual conference this year, it'll be an amazing way to start the week for you. And you can do that when you register, and you're only in the last 4 or 5 days here to register for AASHE's conference. So if you haven't done that and you plan on going, definitely hop on that, and we hope to see you. And that program will be sponsored by Bush Systems this year. And it looks like it's coming out to be a great program. Those details will be posted on our website probably in the next day or so about the whole program for that one. And then this next Kirk webinar, if you're interested in, the next topic will be honing your message and reaching your audience, an exploration of designing effective bin signage and messaging success. And you can visit our website for recordings of past webinars, including this one, if you want to revisit that. So for our ending notes here, I'd like to thank AASHE again for their support of the 2019 webinar series. And one last time, actually, if quickly, Tom, you'd like to share your email for those who are asking about those resources for the studies that you studied.
I'd be happy to. So it's tom.lembo, L-E-M-B-O, at cleanriver.com.
Okay, that's everyone, tom.lembo at cleanriver.com. And then one last time, to all of you who presented today and to all those people who attended, I'd like them to to join me in thanking Bud, Tom, and Darci for their presentations, which were very informative and really painted some of the problems that connect across all of our campuses in right-sizing our collection infrastructure. You can look for their presentations and a recording of the program on the KIRK website, which is www.curc3r.org within the next day or so. And then you will also receive an email follow-up with a link to that resource, probably coming into your email in the morning. So thank you for attending, and we hope you all have a great afternoon.